At dawn in the river delta village of Ankei, Mara woke to the soft clack of bowls and the sharper silence that always followed her mother's steps. Lynn moved through the brick house like a guest who never forgot she was borrowing space, keeping her voice low, setting the best fish where the men could reach it first, and saving the skin and bones for later. In Ankei, people said the new brick walls were a blessing, yet the house felt like a loan with invisible interest. Everyone could see the tiled roof. Few noticed the ledger behind it. Mara noticed everything. She noticed how a greeting changed when a family had sons. She noticed how the village elders used the same smile for weddings and for land disputes. She noticed how her father, Hai, became smaller when someone praised boys, as if the compliment carried a knife. The only place Mara felt taller was at the small table by the window where her study lamp sat, a second-hand bulb in a dented tin shade that made a circle of light like a promise you could hold with both hands. That lamp did not look like power, but it was the first thing in the house that belonged to her future instead of her past. The scholarship notice arrived on a humid Monday, posted on the school gate under curling tape and a poster advertising phone cards. Teacher Han stood beside it, holding a stack of worksheets and a face that had learned to look calm while the world pushed. She read the eligibility rules out loud, and the numbers sounded like a wall. Top scores, entrance exam, travel to the district center, documents stamped by officials who were friends of someone else. Still, Mara's heart moved. She had seen the city once, from a bus window, and it had looked like a place where a girl could walk without being counted. Bao, who sat behind her and always smelled faintly of chalk dust, leaned forward to whisper the exam date. Sora, all restless elbows and bright eyes, copied the requirements into her notebook, as if writing them made them real. Kiet, who wore her hair tied tight and kept her anger even tighter, asked the blunt question everyone avoided. How much does it cost to even try? Teacher Han did not pretend it was free. She wrote the fee on the board, then wrote the bus fare, then wrote the price of photographs for identity papers. The total was not monstrous, but in Ankei it could empty a month. At dinner that night, Mara waited until the bowls were nearly empty before she spoke. She knew the men at the table. Her father, his older brother Uncle Du, and Dewey's friend from the shrimp ponds. A man who laughed, as if laughter could protect him from consequences. Lynn sat one step back, as always, ready to refill rice and swallow her own hunger. Mara told them about the scholarship. She tried to make it sound practical. She tried not to sound like she was reaching. Uncle Du listened with the pleased patience of someone hearing a child describe the moon. A scholarship, he repeated, turning the word over as if checking it for cracks. That is for families who can afford the papers. He smiled at Hai, then at Lynn, and Mara felt the smile land like a hand on her shoulder, friendly and heavy. Hai cleared his throat and began to talk about timing, about harvest, about the way travel made girls unsafe. Lynn did not argue. She never argued in public. Instead, she slid a little extra rice into Mara's bowl when no one was looking. A quiet yes. The next morning, Lynn walked with Mara to the market before school, her sandals wet with river mist. They stopped at Lynn's small stall where she sold salted fish and herbs. Lynn counted bills with careful fingers. "We can try," she said, not quite meeting Mara's eyes. "We can try once." The word once mattered. In Ankei, a girl was allowed one attempt at something that looked like freedom. A second attempt looked like defiance. Mara promised she would make the first one count. Then Lynn hesitated, glanced around as if the air itself might report them, and said, "Tonight, after your father sleeps, I will show you something." The dowry chest waited under Lynn's bed, camphor-scented and older than the brick house. When night folded over the village, when the generator hum in the lane quieted, Lynn lit a candle and pulled the chest out with 2 hands. She untied a cloth bundle and laid papers on the mat. Faded forms, a stamp that had bled into the fibers, and a map sketched in ink that had learned to survive humidity. Mara's breath caught. "A land deed," she whispered, then stopped herself. Lynn pressed a finger to her lips. "Do not say it loud," she warned. "Words bring ears." The papers were not for the brick house. They were for a strip of land near the dike. Land Lynn's father had left her before he died. Land that should have been hers by right but had been treated as negotiable because she was a woman. "Your uncle helped with the loan for the house," Lynn said, voice tight. "He said he did it for family. But family is a word people use when they want you to stop counting." Mara understood then why the brick house felt borrowed. The walls were sturdy. The ground under them was contested. Uncle Du did not wait long to make the contest visible. 2 days later, he rode his motorbike into their yard and parked it where neighbors could see, the chrome catching sun like a signal. He spoke loudly about shrimp prices and real work, and how young people were being poisoned by city ideas. Then he lowered his voice just enough to feel intimate and said to Lynn, "I hear Mara wants to take a trip for school. Papers, fees, bus tickets, those are not small." He offered help. He always offered help the way a fisherman offered bait. "I can lend you the money," he said. Eyes on Mara now. "A simple agreement. I keep the land papers safe while you repay. You can trust me. I am family." Lynn's hands clenched around the edge of her apron. Mara saw her mother's mouth form a no that did not leave her lips. Hai, trapped between his brother's authority and his wife's fear, muttered about gratitude. Dewey patted Hai's shoulder like a blessing and left the yard with a smile that did not feel like kindness. Mara did not sleep that night. She lay under the mosquito net and listened to the house settle, to the faint slap of water against the riverbank, to the distant pop of someone's radio. A radio. The thought opened like a door. Mara had always been good at small repairs. She could fix a fan by cleaning dust from its bearings, could coax a phone to charge by straightening a bent connector. When she was 10, she had taken apart her father's broken flashlight and put it back together with a piece of wire. People called it a boy's habit and laughed. And Lynn had said nothing, but later she had pressed the flashlight into Mara's hands as if handing her a tool and permission. Now Mara sat up, slipped out of bed, and looked toward the corner where an old cardboard box held things neighbors had thrown away. A cracked rice cooker lid, a tangle of cords, a rusted radio with one knob missing. She lifted the radio and felt its weight, the quiet stubbornness of something that had once carried news across distance. If she could make it speak again, she could make money without borrowing it from Dewey. In the days that followed, Mara worked like someone building a bridge while standing on the wrong side of a river. She studied after school, copying practice questions until her fingers ached, and she repaired the radio in stolen hours, cleaning the circuit board with alcohol, replacing a burned resistor with one scavenged from a broken toy, soldering with a borrowed iron in the back of the market stall, while Lynn kept watch. Bao brought her a mathematics book with pages missing but answers intact. "For the exam," he said, as if saying the words too loudly might jinx them. Sora brought gossip like weather reports. "Dewey told the elders you are getting ideas above your station," she whispered, eyes bright with anger. Kiet offered something rarer. A plan. "We do not ask him," she said. "We pay ourselves." The radio came alive on a Friday evening with a cough of static, and then a clear voice reading market prices from the provincial station. Mara nearly laughed. Lynn pressed a hand over her mouth, and her eyes shone in candlelight. They carried the radio to Mr. Nahan, a stallholder who repaired bicycles for a living and believed in paying for skill. He tested the dial, listened to the clean sound, and handed Mara folded bills with a look that held surprise and respect. "You fixed what other people abandoned," he said. "That is the kind of work that keeps a family from drowning." Mara's hands trembled as she took the money. It was not much. It was enough to buy the exam fee without asking Dew. When Uncle Dew learned she had not accepted his loan, he changed tactics. He did not shout. He did not forbid her. He began to tighten the village around her like a net. The clerk who took applications at the commune office suddenly needed extra copies of papers. The photographer's shop in the district center lost her photo file. A neighbor who owed Lynn money started telling people Lynn was greedy. Small delays, small humiliations, designed to make Mara tired. Teacher Han noticed. One afternoon she kept Mara after class and asked, "Do you know why the system loves paperwork?" Mara shook her head. "Because paperwork makes people give up without anyone needing to hit them," Teacher Han said, and her voice went very quiet. "We will not give up." They made a list of documents. They made a schedule. They turned the scholarship into work with steps. Bao handled numbers. Sora handled persuasion. She had a way of smiling at officials that made them feel seen and therefore cooperative. Kiet handled protection. She walked beside Mara through the market lanes when men's eyes followed too long. Lynn handled everything else. She woke before dawn to fry fish and sell it. She hid money in a tin under the rice sack. She practiced signing her name on scrap paper so she would not hesitate when an official asked for it. One night, Lynn looked at Mara and said, "When I was your age, I thought the world was fixed. Then I learned it was fixed by people. People can be moved." Mara felt the sentence settle into her bones. The exam day came with rain. The bus to the district center smelled of wet clothes and anxiety. Mara clutched her admission slip as if it might evaporate. On the road, They passed rice fields submerged to their ankles, water reflecting gray sky like a second layer of clouds. At the testing hall, boys joked loudly, while girls spoke in whispers, and the guards looked at the girls' bags as if expecting trouble. Teacher Han was there, not as a chaperone but as a witness. She stood near the gate with a folder of copies and a face that dared anyone to try cheating Mara out of her place. Inside, the desks were chipped, the fans were weak, and the paper smelled of ink and possibility. Mara began. She did not ace every question. She did not need to. She needed to be among the best, and she was. When she walked out into the wet air afterward, she felt lightheaded, as if her skull had been emptied and refilled with wind. Bao waited with his hands in his pockets. "How was it?" he asked. "Hard," she said, and smiled. Kiet clapped her shoulder once. Sora hugged her like she was celebrating a victory already won. Lin did not come to the hall. She stayed at the market, but that night she waited on the mat with a bowl of soup and asked no questions until Mara had eaten. Then she touched Mara's hair and said, "Whatever happens, you tried. That matters." It mattered enough to scare Uncle Du. When the preliminary scores were posted 2 weeks later, Mara's name sat high on the list. People stared at it as if it were a trick. Dewey came to the brick house the same afternoon, his smile reset, his voice soft. "Congratulations," he said. And the word sounded like a coin dropped into a cup. "Now you will need to travel to the provincial office for verification. More papers, more fees, more risk." He leaned closer to Lin. "You know I can make this easy. Give me the deed. I will protect it, and I will protect you from the elders' anger. Women do not need land. Women need peace." Mara heard the sentence and understood the threat hiding inside it. "If you do not hand me what I want, I will make your life loud." That night, Mara and Lin moved the deed papers. They wrapped them in oilcloth and hid them inside a sealed jar beneath the floorboard near the stove, a place that smelled of smoke and daily labor. Kiet insisted on knowing where, not because she wanted control, but because she believed in backups. Bao brought a cheap lock and installed it on the dowry chest, so Dewey could not claim the papers had been lost there. Sora wrote down dates and names in her notebook. When Dewey visited, what he said, who was present. "If we ever need to talk to the district office," she explained, "we will need more than feelings. We will need a record." Teacher Han approved. "Truth loves notes," she said. The village meeting happened the following Sunday in the communal hall. Men sat on benches under portraits of leaders and the faded calligraphy of moral slogans. Women stood outside in the shade, holding babies in their own silence. Dewey was there, loud and relaxed, speaking as if he owned the air. The elders discussed irrigation repairs, then drifted, as they always did, toward land and who deserved what. Mara listened from the doorway. She heard her family's name mentioned as if it were a minor detail. She heard Lin described as Hai's wife instead of as herself. Then an elder said, "The strip near the dike should be transferred to Dewey for management. It is better in men's hands." Mara felt her stomach drop. That was the deed land. Lin's face went pale. Hai shifted, trapped. Dewey lifted his hands in a gesture that pretended humility. "I only want to help," he said. Mara stepped forward before she could overthink it. Her voice came out steady, surprising even her. "That land was gifted to my mother by her father," she said. "There is a deed. It is hers." The hall went quiet in the way a room does when a small animal suddenly speaks. Some men laughed. An elder frowned as if Mara had broken a piece of furniture. Dewey's eyes narrowed, then softened. "Child," he said, "documents are complicated. Women misunderstand them." Teacher Han, standing behind Mara now, placed a folder on the table. "Then let's not misunderstand," she said. "Let's read." The elders did not like being challenged by a woman, and they liked being challenged by a teacher even less. They muttered about respect. They muttered about tradition. But Teacher Han had brought copies of regulations and a calm that made anger look childish. She pointed out that land transfers required signatures and proper verification. She asked, politely, to see the deed in question. Dew smiled and said it was safe with him. He offered to bring it later. Sora, standing at the doorway with her notebook, spoke up. "If it exists," she said, "why not now?" The room's attention turned, and Dewey's smile began to crack. He reached into his bag and produced a paper. Too clean at the edges, the stamp suspiciously bright. Mara's heart pounded. It was not her mother's deed. It was something else dressed up to look official. A forgery. Teacher Han asked to examine it closely. Dewey hesitated a fraction of a second too long. Bao, who had been silent, suddenly said, "The stamp ink is wrong." Everyone turned to him. Bao held up his own identity document and pointed at the stamp's pattern. "This office uses a different seal. They changed it last year." Bao's voice was not loud, but it carried, because certainty does. The hall shifted. An elder leaned forward. Another elder glanced at Dewey's hands. The story Dewey had been telling for years began to wobble. Dew recovered quickly. "Children," he said with a forced laugh. "What do you know of offices?" He looked at the elders. "If there is confusion, we can settle it at the district level. But you know how far that is. How expensive. Are you willing to waste time for a woman's stubbornness?" Mara felt rage rise, but she forced it into words. "I am willing," she said. "And if the law says my mother owns her land, then it is not stubbornness, it is truth." The meeting ended without a resolution, which was Dew's usual win. Delay could starve people. But this time, the delay did not belong only to him. Teacher Han filed a request for district review the next morning. Sora went with her to submit it, smiling at the clerk as if the clerk were important enough to behave well. Lin signed her name slowly and did not apologize for it. Dewey did not stop them. He simply made other calls. The village began to buzz with rumors. Lin was ungrateful. Mara was being manipulated. Teacher Han was arrogant. Lin endured the whispers at the market stall and kept selling fish. Mara endured the looks at school and kept studying, because the scholarship results were still pending, and she refused to let Dewey steal 2 futures at once. A storm arrived, as if the weather had been listening to the village and decided to add its own pressure. The river rose. The dike leaked. Shrimp ponds overflowed and turned brackish. People ran in the rain carrying sacks of rice above their heads. Dewey used the chaos like a tool. He rode into the village with men and shouted about emergency management, about protecting property, about how he needed access to the dike land immediately. He came to Lin's house soaked and urgent. "If you give me the deed now," he said, "I can file it and keep it safe from flood damage. Otherwise, if the papers are ruined, you will have nothing." Lin stared at him, water dripping from her hair. For once, she did not step back. "If you want to help," she said, "help stack sandbags." Dewey's eyes flashed, and Mara realized she had never seen him refused so directly. The next day, someone broke into the brick house while Lin and Mara were at the market. The lock on the dowry chest was bent. The floorboard near the stove had been pried up. The jar was gone. Lin sank to the mat as if her legs had turned to water. Mara's chest went cold. Dewey had stopped pretending. Key had arrived within minutes, breath hard, and said she had seen Dewey's motorbike near their lane during the storm. Bao clenched his jaw until a muscle jumped. Sora's eyes narrowed with a kind of focus that looked like violence but was actually strategy. "We do not accuse without proof," she said. "We get proof. They did what poor people always did when faced with theft by someone powerful. They built a case out of small certainties." Sora went door to door asking questions with a smile that made people talk. Kiet stood nearby so no one got brave about lying. Bao drew a map of the lanes and marked who had been where during the storm. Mara went to Mr. Nahan's bicycle shop and asked to borrow his old phone, the one that recorded audio when the button was held. "Why?" he asked. Mara looked him in the eye. "Because I am tired," she said, "of losing to people who never have to prove anything." Mr. Nahan handed her the phone without another word. On the 3rd day, Dewey showed up at the market stall as if nothing had happened. He leaned against a post and watched Lin weigh fish. "Storms are hard," he said, voice smooth. "Papers get lost. It is unfortunate." Lin's hands shook. Mara stepped forward and held the phone in her palm, the record button already pressed. "Uncle," she said, "if you took the deed, give it back. The district office will review it either way." Dewey chuckled. "Review what?" he asked. "Without papers, you have only a woman's complaint." He leaned closer and lowered his voice. Warm as a secret. "Stop this. I can still make it easy for you. Withdraw the district request, and I will return the jar. Refuse, and your mother will stand in line at offices until she forgets her own name." He paused, then added, almost kindly, "A girl should think of her future. Do not let your mother's pride ruin your scholarship." Mara kept her face still. Inside, her anger became a blade. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. Dewey blinked, confused, and walked away, unaware he had just confessed to leverage and theft. Teacher Han listened to the recording in her small office after school. She did not smile, but something in her eyes eased, as if a burden had shifted. "This is evidence," she said. "Not perfect, but it is something, and we will add to it." She made copies of the submission forms again. She asked Lynn to write a statement. She brought them to the district office in person, because she knew that distance was the first weapon used against villagers. At the district building, the air smelled of paper and sweat. Fans moved hot air in circles. People waited in rows like they were waiting to be forgiven. Du was there too, sitting in a chair that suggested he knew someone. His smile returned when he saw them, but his eyes flicked to Mara's face, searching for weakness. He did not find it. The clerk at the district office tried to delay them. The clerk said the responsible officer was away. The clerk said they needed another stamp. Teacher Han asked, politely, for the clerk's name. She wrote it down. Sora, who had come along, smiled and asked who the clerk reported to. Bao stood behind them holding a folder like a shield. Kiet stood by the door. In a building full of people used to being pushed aside, their small group became an obstacle. Eventually, an officer appeared, annoyed. Teacher Han laid out the case calmly. The original deed existed. It had been stolen. A forged document had been presented at the village meeting, and there was an audio recording of coercion. The officer's annoyance shifted into caution. Paperwork had rules, and rules could trap officials as much as villagers. The officer scheduled a hearing. The hearing took place on a Wednesday that tasted of dust. Lynn wore her cleanest blouse. Mara wore her school uniform. Dewey wore a crisp shirt and a confidence that had gotten him through years of taking without asking. The officer listened, asked questions, and frowned at contradictions. Dew claimed the deed had been given to him voluntarily for safekeeping. Lynn said no. Mara played the recording. Dew's face tightened at the sound of his own voice. He tried to laugh it off. The officer did not laugh. Then Sora produced the notebook page with dates and witnesses. Then Bao explained the seal discrepancy again, with precise, unromantic detail. Truth arrived not as a single dramatic punch, but as a pile of small weights placed on the same scale. The scale began to tip. Still, evidence was not the same as recovery. "Where is the original deed?" the officer asked. Dewey shrugged. "Lost in the storm," he said. Lynn's mouth tightened. Teacher Han leaned forward. "If it was lost," she said, "then we should check the property registry. The older file copies. The record from the year the deed was issued." The officer hesitated. That would require effort. That would require admitting the system might have been used for theft. Teacher Han did not raise her voice. She simply waited, and the waiting itself became pressure. Finally, the officer ordered a record search and an inspection of Dewey's storage shed near the shrimp ponds, where lost things sometimes reappeared when officials looked. Dewey's smile faltered. For the first time, he looked like a man who had stepped onto ground that was not his. The inspection happened 2 days later. An officer and 2 assistants went with Teacher Han and Lynn. Mara insisted on coming. So did Kiet. Dewey rode ahead, protesting, but his protests sounded thin. At the shrimp ponds, the air stank of salt and rot. Dewey's shed was locked. The officer demanded the key. Dewey delayed. The officer called for bolt cutters. The lock snapped with a loud metallic pop that sounded, to Mara, like a door opening. Inside the shed were nets, feed sacks, and, in the back corner, a jar wrapped in oilcloth. Lynn made a sound like a breath breaking. The officer opened the jar carefully. The papers were damp but intact. The stamp bled slightly. The ink held. Lynn reached out with trembling hands and touched the deed as if it were a living thing. Dewey stared at the floor. The district office issued its decision the following week. The deed belonged to Lynn. The attempted transfer was invalid, and Dew was fined for presenting false documents. The decision did not turn the world gentle. It did not erase gossip. It did not make the village elders suddenly respect women. But it gave Lynn something she had never had in Anke: paper that matched truth. Lynn held the decision letter in her hands and laughed once, a short sound that seemed to surprise her. Hai looked at his wife differently, as if seeing the outline of her strength for the first time. Dewey avoided their yard for a while. He had not been destroyed. Powerful men rarely were. But he had been marked, and in villages, marks mattered. Then, as if the universe had been saving a second decision for when Lynn could stand to receive it, the scholarship results arrived. Teacher Han read them in class with her usual calm. Mara's name was on the list. So was Bao's. So was Sora's, in a different category for writing and civic leadership. Kiet missed by a narrow margin. but Teacher Han pulled her aside and said there were other routes, other exams, other years. Kiet's face tightened, then steadied. "I will find my door," she said. The weeks before departure were full of practical work. Lin registered the dike land properly with the district office, paying fees that felt like bites taken out of the future but were actually investments in it. She started planting fast-growing vegetables there, proof of use. Mara took on small repair jobs in the market radios, fans, cheap phone chargers, building a pocket of money that did not come from Due. Bao studied in the evenings and helped Lin with calculations for her stall. Sora typed scholarship forms on a borrowed computer at the internet cafe, her fingers flying like she was chasing something. Teacher Han wrote recommendation letters and made copies because she trusted paper only when there were backups. The brick house began to feel less like a loan and more like a base. On the morning Mara left, the sky was clear in a way that made everything look sharp. Lin woke before dawn, cooked rice and eggs, and packed food in banana leaves as if feeding Mara could protect her from distance. Hai stood in the doorway, awkward, holding a small envelope with money he had saved without telling anyone. "For books," he said. His voice sounded unfamiliar on the word. Mara took the envelope and did not mock him. She understood that men in Anke were not born knowing how to offer a daughter respect. They had to learn, and learning was messy. Outside, Bao waited with his own worn backpack and a face set on focus. Sora arrived with a notebook and a grin that tried to hide fear. Kiet walked them to the bus stop and handed Mara a small screwdriver wrapped in cloth. For when life tries to loosen your screws. At the bus stop, Uncle Du stood across the road, smoking, watching. He did not approach. He did not smile. His presence was a reminder that victory had edges. Mara looked at him anyway, not to provoke, but to claim the right to look back. Then she turned toward the bus, toward the city, toward a future that would demand more fights than this one. Lin gripped her hand until the last moment. "Remember," Lin whispered, "the world is fixed by people." Mara squeezed back. "Then people can be moved," she replied. The bus engine growled. The doors hissed. Mara climbed the steps with the weight of her bag and the weight of everyone who had pushed her forward. She sat by the window. The village slid past. The market, the dike, the strip of land that now belonged to her mother in both truth and paper. Lin stood small in the distance, then smaller, then gone. Mara did not cry. She breathed. She opened her notebook and wrote a list. Fees, dorm address, class schedule, the phone number of Teacher Han, the place in the city where she could buy cheap solder, the date she would come home next. A dream was fragile. A plan had joints. The road unspooled. The city rose ahead like a test and an invitation. Mara watched it approach and felt, for the first time, that the future was not a rumor. It was a place she was already moving toward. The city did not welcome her with music. It welcomed her with heat trapped between concrete buildings and the smell of fuel and fried dough. At the terminal, men shouted destinations. Motorbikes threaded through crowds like needles. And Mara felt the way she had felt on exam day. Small but not allowed to be small. Bao found her in the crowd with his bag slung over one shoulder and a careful expression. "You made it," he said, as if saying it could keep the city from swallowing them. Sora arrived later, sweating, laughing, already telling a story about a bus driver who tried to charge her extra because she was too confident. Mara laughed, then remembered to keep her wallet in the front pocket. They took a shared minivan to the provincial college dorms, clinging to their bags as the driver drove like time was something he could bargain with. The dormitory smelled of detergent, old rice, and bodies learning how to share. The administrator behind the counter wore lipstick the color of authority, and asked for forms Mara had never heard of. Proof of residence, proof of income, proof of scholarship, proof that she existed in a way the office could understand. Mara handed over copies. The woman flipped through them with practiced boredom. "Original stamp?" she asked. Mara pointed. The woman shrugged. "Wrong ink." Mara felt the familiar cold rise in her stomach, the feeling of being trapped in someone else's rules. Then Bao slid his own documents across the counter and quietly pointed to a regulation printed on the back of the scholarship letter. The administrator's eyes narrowed. She reread the line. She exhaled, annoyed at being corrected, and stamped a temporary card anyway. Sora smiled sweetly and said, "Thank you for your help." The woman looked up, as if searching for the insult, and found none she could accuse. Mara took the card and felt, for the first time, that she was learning how to fight with paper instead of fists. Their room was on the 3rd floor. 4 metal beds, 2 already claimed by girls from another district, and 2 left for them. Mara sat on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling fan that spun like a tired thought. One of the other girls, Mai, offered a packet of dried mango without asking questions. "First time away?" she asked. Mara nodded. "You'll be homesick at night," Mai said, practical. "In the day you'll be too busy." Mara thanked her and unpacked. Notebooks, 2 shirts, the soldering iron wrapped in cloth, and Lynn's banana leaf packet. She ate slowly. The food tasted like home and like leaving. The first class was in a lecture hall so large that Mara's village school could have fit inside it twice. The professor wrote formulas on the board without looking at the students, as if knowledge did not require permission. Mara's hand cramped from taking notes. Bao sat 2 rows ahead, already underlining. Sora asked a question halfway through and drew a few annoyed looks, then a few grateful ones. After class, Mara followed the stream of students into a courtyard where clubs had set up tables. Debating society, volunteer tutoring, robotics, journalism. A robotics club member demonstrated a small line-following robot that buzzed along a strip of tape. Mara watched it with a fascination that felt like recognition. She thought of the broken radio. She thought of how a small circuit could carry a voice across provinces. When the club member asked if she wanted to join, she surprised herself by saying yes. Money remained a problem, because distance did not dissolve hunger. The scholarship covered tuition and a portion of housing, but meals, books, and transit were their own weather. Mara took a part-time job in the campus maintenance office, fixing fans and desk lamps in exchange for a small stipend. The supervisor, a man with cigarette-stained fingers, tested her once by giving her a broken power strip and saying, "If you can't fix it, don't come back." Mara fixed it, then fixed the 2 others he had kept under his desk for months. The supervisor scratched his head, then laughed. "You're from the Delta?" he asked, as if skill could be explained by geography. "Yes," Mara said, and kept working. Each repaired object felt like a coin, minted from her own hands. Back in NK, Lynn's days changed shape. Without Mara's school schedule, the house felt both emptier and freer. Lynn stood at her stall and noticed how many times she had looked over her shoulder for permission. She stopped doing it. When a neighbor came to gossip about how girls in the city become strange, Lynn smiled and asked the neighbor to pay the money she owed from last month's fish. The neighbor sputtered and left. Lynn felt a bloom of satisfaction so sharp she almost laughed. On the dike land, Lynn planted morning glory and chilies, rose straight as if her hands were drawing a new kind of future. Hai helped without being asked. Sometimes he spoke about Mara's classes as if he were proud. Other times he stayed quiet, still adjusting to the idea that a daughter's success could belong to him too. Uncle Du did not disappear. He still owned shrimp ponds. He still had friends. But now he carried a fine and a story people repeated with different endings, and his laugh lost some weight. He tried to recover his status by doing favors loudly, donating a sack of rice to the commune, paying for a new speaker system in the communal hall, sponsoring a boys' soccer team. The elders accepted his gifts. They also watched him more carefully. He had learned, too late, that once paper and law turn on you, even your friends start calculating. Kiet stayed in Anke, but she did not stay still. She began tutoring younger girls in the evenings, using Bao's old math book and Sora's notes. She taught them how to fill out forms, how to copy documents without smudging, how to ask for signatures without shrinking. "You can be polite without being small," she told them. Some girls listened with wide eyes. Some boys mocked them from outside the window until Kiet walked out and asked the boys if they wanted help with their own homework. The boys fled, embarrassed by the offer. Kiet went back inside and kept teaching. Sora's scholarship included a small stipend for community reporting. She pitched a story to the campus newspaper about land rights in the Delta, about how floods and paperwork could drown a family just as surely as water. The editor, a tired woman with ink on her fingers, said the story was too local. Sora argued that local was just a way of saying not worth caring about. The editor raised an eyebrow, then gave her 2 columns. Sora wrote with names changed but truths intact. When the piece was published, students stopped her in the hallway to ask if it was real. Sora smiled and said, "Real enough." Mara read it in the dorm and felt something twist in her chest, grief, pride, anger, and then settle into determination. The city taught Mara new kinds of cruelty. Teachers who dismissed village accents, classmates who assumed she was slow because her shoes were cheap, administrators who said, "Come back tomorrow," as if tomorrow were free. But it also gave her new allies. Mai, the dorm mate, shared photocopied textbooks without being asked. A senior student in the robotics club, Thon, showed her how to program the line-following robot and said, "You already think like an engineer." Mara did not correct him that she thought like a girl who had learned to repair what was failing because nobody else would. She took the compliment anyway. She stayed late in the lab, learning how sensors translated the world into numbers. She liked the honesty of it. A sensor did not care if you were a daughter or a son. It only cared if you calibrated it. One afternoon near midterm season, Mara received a call from Vân. The number was unfamiliar. She stepped into the stairwell to answer. A man's voice asked for her by name, then said, "Your mother owes money." Mara's stomach tightened. The voice was oily, confident. He said Lin had bought supplies on credit. He said the interest was rising. He said Mara should remember who helps families survive. Mara closed her eyes, breathing. She thought of the district officer's bolt cutters. She thought of the recording. "Send the invoice to my mother in writing," Mara said, "with your signature, with a date, and copy the district office." Silence. Then a forced laugh. "You've changed," Dewey said. Mara did not raise her voice. "I've learned," she replied, and ended the call. That night she could not sleep. The dorm hallway noises faded, but her mind kept moving. She opened Lin's last banana leaf packet, now dry, and smelled fish sauce and smoke. She missed the river. She missed the uncomplicated certainty of knowing every neighbor's face. She also remembered the theft, the meeting hall, the way power leaned in and expected her to bend. She sat at her desk and wrote a letter to Lin. Not a soft letter, but a practical one. What to demand, what to refuse, which officer's name to ask for if anyone tried to intimidate her. She wrote it as if she were writing instructions for repairing a machine, because in a way she was. When she finished, her hands stopped shaking. Weeks later, Lin wrote back through Sora's email, using the library computer in the district center because she still did not own a smartphone. Lin said she was fine. She said the stall was doing better than before because people now paid her more promptly, perhaps afraid she had learned how to complain formally. Lin said Hai had begun walking with her to the commune office when forms needed filing, and he looked uncomfortable but did it anyway. Lin said Dewey had tried to pressure her again and failed. Lin ended the message with one line that made Mara stare for a long time. "When you left, I thought my heart would break. Instead, it grew a backbone." The semester ended with exams that felt different from the entrance test. These were not gates. They were measurements. Mara passed all of them. Bao did better than he expected, and worse than he wanted, which meant he was learning ambition. Sora's grades were solid, but her editor emailed to say her reporting had drawn attention from a provincial NGO that offered internships. Keat, back in Vân, sent a message through Sora. 3 girls from their village had applied for the next scholarship cycle. "They are scared," Keat wrote, "but they are trying." Mara read it twice. During the dry season break, Mara returned to Vân for a week. The bus ride felt shorter than it had the first time, as if distance had adjusted itself. When she stepped onto the cracked road by the market, Lin ran to her in front of everyone and hugged her without shame. People stared. Some smiled. Dewey watched from across the street, expression unreadable. Mara hugged Lin back and felt, under her mother's thin shirt, the new strength that work and victory had carved. Lin led her home, pointing out the vegetable rows on the dike land like a tour guide showing a monument. Hai stood in the doorway, awkward again, then cleared his throat and said, "Welcome back, daughter." The word daughter sounded heavier than before, as if he had practiced it. That week, Mara repaired 3 fans, 1 phone, and an old rice cooker, in exchange for cash she did not quite need but accepted, because independence was a habit worth feeding. She visited Teacher Han, who had stayed in Vân, despite offers to transfer. "The city suits you?" Teacher Han asked. Mara shrugged. "The city is a tool," she said. "I'm learning how to use it." Teacher Han laughed softly. "Good," she said. "Tools are neutral. Hands are not." Before Mara left, Teacher Han handed her a folder. Inside were copies of updated land regulations and contact numbers for a legal aid group. "For your mother," she said. Mara took the folder with both hands. On the last night before Mara returned to the dorm, the village gathered for a small festival near the river. Lanterns floated on the water, reflecting the stars with wobbly devotion. Children chased each other with sparklers. Someone played music from a speaker system that Dewey had donated. The irony made Sora grin when she heard about it later. Lynn stood beside Mara, shoulder to shoulder rather than one step behind. They watched lanterns drift. Lynn said, quietly, "When you were small, I used to think my job was to keep you safe by keeping you small." Mara looked at her mother's face, older in the lantern light, and said, "You kept me alive. Now let me be big." Lynn nodded once. They did not need more words. When Mara returned to the city, she carried more than rice and dried fish. She carried proof that the village could change, even if it changed slowly. In the robotics lab, she built a simple flood sensor prototype with Thon, a cheap device that could alert farmers when water rose past a threshold. It was not a miracle. It was wires and logic and a loud buzzer. She thought of Enki's dike. She imagined Lynn hearing an alarm in time to move sacks of rice, to protect paperwork, to protect herself. She submitted the prototype to a student innovation contest. She did not expect to win. She expected to learn. At the contest presentation, she stood on a stage with lights too bright and spoke into a microphone that amplified her village accent into the room. Her hands trembled at first, then steadied as she described what floods did to families who had no savings and no leverage. She did not cry. She explained. She showed the device and the cost breakdown. Judges asked questions. Mara answered with the calm of someone who had argued with elders and survived. When the results were announced, her team won 3rd place. The prize money was small, but the attention was useful. An NGO representative approached afterward and asked if she would consider piloting the sensors in a Delta community. Mara smiled. "Yes," she said, and wrote down the woman's number. On the train of her life, Mara began to understand that leaving Anke had never been the end goal. It was the beginning of having options. Bao began tutoring other scholarship students in math. Sora took an internship and learned how to file information requests without being laughed out of offices. Kiet kept teaching girls to hold pens without apology. Lynn grew vegetables on land no one could steal without paperwork. Even Hai changed, inch by inch, as if learning a new language of pride. Uncle Du still walked the market, still talked about shrimp, still tried to make himself sound necessary. But when he looked at Lynn now, he did not see a woman who would swallow anything. When he looked at Mara, he did not see a girl he could block with a rumor. He saw a person connected to